Hi, my name is Daniel Kitts. I'm a producer with The Agenda with Steve Paikin. And we've recently done a series on the issues and situation in Sri Lanka, given that many people in Ontario are from Sri Lanka, either from the Sinhalese, Muslim, or Tamil community, or Burgher community as well. And since that series, we've decided to do a few follow-up interviews to make sure that we get as many perspectives as possible on the issue. To that end, I'm joined today by Ira de Silva. She's the past president of the Sri Lanka United National Association of Canada. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today.
Thank you.
I wanted to sort of refer to a letter that you recently wrote to the Conservative MP Roxanne James. She's the Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness. And I want to refer to it because in it you raise a number of concerns that I think a number of people in the Sri Lankan expatriate community, particularly in the Sinhalese community, have over Canada's current posture towards Sri Lanka. So I'll start by reading a few lines from the letter. First of all, Canada has no right to criticize Sri Lanka on human rights when Canada is being investigated for the violation of the human rights of Canadians. Just for those that might not be aware, what specific human rights violations on the part of Canada are you referring to?
Right now, Canada is being investigated by the UN on the rights of the aboriginal, the indigenous populations of Canada. As you know, they were here about 2 weeks ago to conduct an inquiry. All I'm trying to say is, the human rights is a very broad issue, and every country almost seems to have some issues regarding their own populations.
Fair enough. So basically, Canada has no right to criticize Sri Lanka for its human rights violations if it itself is dealing with its own human rights violations.
As I said, most countries have issues, with their own populations. Mm-hmm. And basically, any country has the right to determine its own laws, its own policies and whatever, but I do not believe that any country has a right to decide the policies and the laws of any other country. So we have to take each country on its own. And Canada also has issues. It's not that Canada does not have issues, it has issues.
You'd agree that Sri Lanka has human rights issues?
Absolutely, yeah. Yes.
But you just feel that it's up to Sri Lanka to deal with those issues?
Well, as I said, each country has to deal with its own issues. It has to take into consideration the views of others. Others have the right to, present their views, but no country has the right to impose anything on anybody else.
Do you feel Canada is somehow imposing itself on Sri Lanka? Because in a sense...
No, it's not.
Okay.
It's not imposing it. It is just taken a stance, and I only dealt with Roxanne James based on a memo that she had sent out asking for feedback on Canada's stance on boycotting or, Mr. Harper's statements on the Commonwealth. That I'm responding to something that she sent out.
No, I understand absolutely. What I'm trying to get at is what would, in your view, be a constructive engagement on Canada's part with respect to Sri Lanka? If the Prime Minister, for example, not attending the Commonwealth Summit and expressing concern over human rights issues in Sri Lanka, what would be a more constructive engagement?
My personal point of view is that Mr. Harper has every right, to raise these issues within the framework of the Commonwealth. Had Mr. Harper gone and Mr. Baird gone, they could have raised it one-on-one with all the other members of the Commonwealth who are present. I mean, it would have been a discussion amongst all of them. And these issues certainly could have been brought to the table. And then there were even there were the foreign ministers have their separate meeting and so on. There were many avenues that Mr. Harper and Mr. Baird had to raise these issues, but one-on-one, without, in the point of view of constructive criticism, and negotiation, and what can Canada do to help or give, present, all the countries could have joined in that discussion.
I see. Now, Prime Minister David Cameron of Great Britain did go to Sri Lanka and did participate in the Commonwealth Summit, but he took an opportunity to be very vocal about his concerns over the Sri Lanka situation there. He visited the north, which was the site of much of the fighting. He made some very public statements where he expressed concern about Sri Lanka's progress. Was that a constructive engagement in your view because he was there and he was participating in the Commonwealth Summit?
Well, Mr. Cameron too came there. Well, I mean, Mr. Cameron is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He has his own agenda. The fact of the matter is, as you know, all the media reported that the day before he left for that meeting, he met with the representatives of the Global Tamil Forum, the Tamils again, the front organizations of the Tamils in the UK. And because they were, pressuring him to do this. Once again, Mr. Cameron, like everybody else in every country where there is a very vocal and a very, aggressive Tamil diaspora, pushing the governments of the countries in which they are domiciled, they wanted their message carried, and Mr. Cameron did carry that message. He did it in his own way. Mr. Harper, perhaps, if he went, he could have done it in whichever way or style that he wanted to. I mean, Mr. Cameron went, he did what he wanted to do. So could we have Mr. Harper. Both of them have domestic agendas that they are are responsible for. And those agendas seem to be similar and yet not the same. In Mr. Harper's case, his decision was that he would carry this message by not going. Mr. Cameron, on the other hand, decided, no, I will carry my message with me, which is okay.
In terms of the human rights issue, I do want to talk about a few more things. I'm going to, let me back up by saying, when I interviewed David Pupalapillai of the Canadian Tamil Congress, I read the excerpt from the report of the Secretary General's panel of experts on accountability in Sri Lanka, the part that dealt with violations or probable violations on the part of the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam in terms of human rights. I want to read what the panel said about the government of Sri Lanka. In conclusion, the panel found credible allegations that comprise 5 core categories of potential serious violations committed by the government of Sri Lanka. Killing of civilians through widespread shelling, shelling of hospitals and humanitarian objects, denial of humanitarian assistance, human rights violations suffered by victims and survivors of the conflict, including both internally displaced persons and suspected LTTE cadre, and 5 human rights violations outside the conflict zone, including against the media and other critics of the government. The reason I wanted to raise that is just that I think that some who are critical of Sri Lanka have made the argument that despite the fact that all countries, or many countries, have human rights issues to deal with, the potential concerns out of Sri Lanka are so large and so recent that it merits a more robust and active and vocal international conversation. What's your response to that idea that the qualitative nature of the concerns right now are so great in Sri Lanka that it's different from, say, Canada's human rights violations with respect to natives in the past?
The main crux of that report is that panel clearly stated in the report, having had all the submissions made to them, anybody could have sent submission, whoever it was, that report, and this is the key, in several paragraphs they say, this report is not based on proven fact. Mm-hmm. It was hearsay. And every submission in that report is not available to scrutiny by anybody for 20 years. So we don't know what was said. Nobody knows because it's sealed.
Right,
But the report per se states categorically that it is not based on proven fact. So, the question is, if it is not based on proven fact, if there can be no verification process, then how can anybody, speak to it except what we have in the report?
right. I mean, the report that I'm citing doesn't say that this definitely happened. It's listed as potential serious violations, which is why I think a lot of people are calling for an international investigation to determine whether these things actually happened. What's your view on sort of an international investigation?
Yes, it is based on that report that there have been, calls for an inquiry. It was based on that report. But as I'm pointing out to you, the basis of that report, and when the panelists themselves say that what they have put out is not verifiable, is not based on proven fact, it does not meet the standards of the UN for verification. It's a kind of an open-ended thing where you could say anything, but the person who wants to refute it cannot refute it anyway because you do not have access to what they had. You can only go by the fact of what they have actually put out in a report. And right at the beginning of the report, when they make this statement, right, and nobody can verify it, it's impossible. And by the way, I notice in a lot of your interviews and so on, you sort of have, say, the people who support the government. Please understand, I do not support the government at all. I'm merely expressing a view based on what I read, on what reports I read. It's not a question of, so when I see a report that says this, I have to question as well as anybody else who reads a report like that and has no access to what was said. Whatever submissions were made to it, there is, it is not a question of supporting the government. It is just questioning, like, on what basis was this judgment made, and on that basis of that report, which is what they started this question of must have an investigation and so on. If it is based on that report, right, it was clearly understood by everybody that it could not go forward because nobody has access to the information that was provided to them. Mm-hmm. I mean, you have to have a verification process, right? And how can that process start when you don't have the basis on which the report was issued? The report is issued, mm-hmm. and they call for an investigation, but they don't tell you on what basis. I mean, it is an open-ended situation.
Okay. On further to this issue, we've talked about Canada's situation with the Native communities. I'm wondering if the Canadian situation that is most applicable to Sri Lanka's situation is not that one, but the relationship between the English majority and the French minority. And there you have a situation where it's obviously not a perfect situation. There has been concerns and discrimination, but there has been a political space created for the French. They have an administrative jurisdiction in the province of Quebec that has enormous powers to determine a great deal of their laws and their society, and there's obviously a recognition of the French language as an important part of the business of government. I'm wondering if that example has any applicability to the situation with respect to the majority Sinhalese and the minority Tamils in Sri Lanka.
Well, if you look at what is happening in Sri Lanka, this is the perception that people have. Now you're talking about the French language and the English language. Well, in Sri Lanka, you can deal with the government, and in the Tamil areas, they deal with it in the Tamil language. If you look at any forms, any government forms, you will get it in those areas. You will get it in English, Tamil, Sinhalese, whichever one you want to use. And the administration is done in Tamil, in the north and in the south. So this perception that it is any different is not. When you talk about, the differences and so on, the question I have always asked is, what are the differences? For example, let me tell you, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody, no matter what your ethnicity, has the right to vote. Okay? Everybody has, whatever their ethnicity, has the right to education in the language that they want to be educated in. Everybody in Sri Lanka has the right, to the healthcare system. I mean, it is not based on any ethnic or division. Anybody can walk into any government hospital or have the services given to them. So there is no distinction being made based on whether you're a Sinhalese, a Tamil, a Muslim, or whatever. Those services are available to every single citizen.
In terms of, though, the governmental structure, it's not a confederation. There's no.
No, it isn't. It is. We have what we call the provincial administration. In a way, it is very similar to Sri Lanka because we call them provinces. The northern province, the eastern province, western province. We have a provincial, provinces which were, by the way, created by the British. But we do have all these provinces. And then subsequent to the Indo-Lanka agreement, there was an act passed in Parliament, right, which spelled out what jurisdiction is available in every province. And it was one act of Parliament that decided that. So there is no differentiation in what one province or the other province have. All have the same power.
Sure, but it seems like they don't have a lot of power. For example,
Well, maybe, but that was the act that was passed in Parliament. Okay, so there is no. So what I'm trying to say is, all provinces have the same powers. There is no distinction in that.
Right.
They have the same. They have the same provincial powers. They have the same language. Whatever one has, the other has.
Fair enough, but I'm just trying to imagine if Canada, for example, had passed an act of Parliament that said we're going to create these administrative zones called provinces, but they're not going to have a lot of power, and all of them have the same power, but the French one, which is where most of the minority resides, doesn't really have a lot of ability to do much.
Well, that's again what you're saying. You're trying to say that one province does not have the ability to do much. Well, that same principle applies to all the provinces. And by the way, that act of Parliament was based on the Indo-Lanka agreement, and that act was designed and set up by the Indian government.
Right.
And it was for many Sri Lankans, it was an imposition by India because of throughout the long history of the war, which I don't want to get in. But then you see the Mr. Rajiv Gandhi came and he signed this agreement, and he said, well, these are the terms of the agreement, etc. And so that was passed. So that was an act that was designed by India and was approved. So now you can't fault Sri Lanka by saying, well, he didn't give sufficient powers to one. The question is this. There has to be equality. And today, every province, you may not think that they have much power. However that may be, each province has the same power.
Right. All of Canada's provinces have the same power under our constitution as well, of course.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So you have to live within the constitution. Now,
right,
you want to amend it if they want, but at no time would you not say that at no time can you have a policy which gives one more weight than another, because that's the start of another problem.
Right. No, I'm not suggesting that. What I'm trying to say is that I wonder if Canada had not granted or had not created a powerful provincial system that granted all parts of the country, including Quebec, a political space to determine key aspects of day-to-day life, whether Canada would have succeeded and whether the French in Canada would feel as at home and as accommodated as they do, even if they still feel very not completely accommodated. Well, I'm not suggesting that the North be given more power. I'm suggesting that the state of Sri Lanka is so concentrated in Colombo that no region has real political space to do anything, and therefore for the Tamil areas where there's a lot of concern over the political space of Tamils, this is a huge problem.
Again, you have the perception that, that in the North they do not have what somebody else has or whatever. That is not correct.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that again.
Look, Canada has its own constitution. Sri Lanka has its own constitution. As I said before, each country has its own systems, and that is the way it is. Now we have this system, and each province has the same powers. There cannot be any differentiation, made just, and we talk about the Tamil areas. What are the Tamil areas? The Tamils live everywhere in the island. The majority of the Tamils do not live in the north. They live in the other parts of the country. If you look at the statistics, the 55% of the Tamil population of Sri Lanka do not live in what you refer to and what is commonly referred to as the Tamil areas of the north. They do not. Most of them live outside the north. They live in the central, in the southern. There is no discrimination. There is no bar on Tamil living anywhere in the island. And that has been the same throughout the war and throughout history. They have had the right to live anywhere they want. And that is not a right that anybody has to deprive any citizen of Sri Lanka to live wherever they choose to live. There has to be freedom to live wherever you want to live. And the Tamils have chosen to live in these areas, I mean in the north and in the south and everywhere else. And there has been no problem. It is when you get this exclusivity that the problem begins. There cannot be no one area in that island that is exclusively for any one community, no matter what the community is.
I'd like to read another part of your letter where you write, should you want to stop pretending that you have concern for human rights, your first step would be to acknowledge the part that Canadians played in terrorism in Sri Lanka. That is accountability which Canada keeps talking about. Just explain to us what you mean by that.
What I mean by that is that it was Canadian citizens who funded the Tamil terrorism in Sri Lanka for decades. What I am telling you is what is available in the Canadian media and supported by the Canadian security services. It was the Canadian security services that found out and traced the money and the background when a bomb went off in Sri Lanka in what we call the Central Bank building that is in the heart of Colombo. It killed 110 people. It wounded over 1,000 people. They are still suffering from that. The money went from Canada. The $7 million went from Canada, and if you can check, it came from the RCMP, the report. Right. That money went purely to destroy that. The residue of the money, that was used to bomb one of the holiest shrines of Buddhism, which is the Temple of the Tooth in Kandy. Now that is direct terrorism on all Sri Lankans. And what I would like to point out to you is that 30-year conflict, right, was against all Sri Lankans versus one group, the LTTE. all Sri Lankans throughout the island were killed, were bombed, were maimed. I mean, the terrorism was everywhere in the island. So all communities were affected. And but the government, when you keep talking about the government of Sri Lanka, well, any responsible government, would you not say any responsible government has to protect its citizens from this kind of extreme violence? It was an internal conflict. We never went and bombed anybody else, or we never fought a war anywhere else. And by the way, this terrorist group, if you are aware, they had their ground forces, they had conventional armies, they had a navy because they sank many ships around the island, and they even bombed Colombo from the air. And I'm not talking of suicide bombers, which they are well known for. I'm talking of actual bombing from a plane. And incidentally, I was in Colombo when they dropped that bomb on Colombo. So we are talking of a very high level of violence. And every government, I'm sure you would agree, has the obligation to protect its citizens, right? You have to stop this.
Mm-hmm.
And we had it for 30 years. So we can't just pluck out one segment of it. We have to look at it in the entirety of the period in which they operated.
Right. But in terms of Canada, the Canadian government did not send...
The Canadian government, no. However, why I say they are responsible is because Canadian politicians actually even helped in fundraising dinners for this effort on the part of Canadian citizens to send money to Sri Lanka to fund the Tamil terrorists to terrorize the population of Sri Lanka. That is the problem, that Canada, the politicians were also on side. They attended fundraising dinners. They turned a blind eye.
Are you sure they were aware? Are you sure they were aware they were raising money for that?
Of course. I don't want to get into the details, but you can check it out. What I'm telling you is what was in the Canadian media.
Right. No, I'm quite aware that the...
So, and then if you listen to some of the MPs in the Toronto area and so on, they attend these fundraising rallies, they attend fundraisers for this thing. And where did that money go? What did that money do is the question you have to ask yourself.
Right.
That money went to kill people in Sri Lanka. And they killed not just one community, they were indiscriminate killing.
Right. But I'm saying that
So what I'm asking you is this. Why did these politicians, when the media and the RCMP and the security service were saying money is being collected, money is being used to fund the LTTE, why did the politicians not take that matter up? What about the human rights of the people who were being terrorized? That is what I'm trying to say. Canada turned a blind eye. They did not care about the human rights of all Sri Lankans who were the victims of terrorism. Right? They did not care about it. But now that the war is over, right, all of a sudden it has become, oh my good word, we have to do something because the rights of the Tamils. What about the rights of the other people of the country who are also the victims of terrorism? And that is what I find even today. For instance, Mr. O'Brien went for the Commonwealth Conference, okay? And in that same letter, if you read it, what he did was he went to a place called Elephant Pass and laid a wreath. And as I pointed out in that letter to Roxanne James, what did that wreath read? It was in English, in Sinhalese, and in Tamil. And if you have my letter in front of you, I will give you, even in that, the message was different in the three languages. Perhaps Mr. O'Brien does not know, or your High Commissioner there, would have set it up, because I don't think Mr. O'Brien went and gave them, the wording. But the message was different in the three languages. Now, that is not correct. It should have been a direct translation if it was above board, right? In English, he talks about the victims, all Sri Lankans, of violence. In Sinhalese, he starts with the word war.
Mm-hmm.
There is no mention of war, but there is a difference between war and violence. In Sinhalese, it is war. In Tamil, what does he say? It is the war on the minority, not on Sri Lankans, but on a minority. Now that is highly duplicitous.
Mm-hmm.
That is what I am saying. You know, that you have to be sort of above board. You have to have same message for everybody, right?
Uh-huh. Canada did designate the LTT terrorist organization in 2006. So, is it fair to say that the Canadian government or Canadian politicians have been complicit up to now? Because it seems that the 2006 designation was a clear condemnation of the LTTE.
Well, Canada was the last Western country, by the way, to designate the LTT organization. The EU, the United States did it in 1997. The FBI kept saying that the LTT is the most ruthless terrorist organization in the world. Canada came even after the EU. Having done that, they banned the WTM. That was 2006. The World Tamil Movement was 2008. So it was a kind of an ongoing thing. Canada did the right thing to do so. However, nothing changed in the effort to help the Sri Lankan people, against this violence that was being funded by Canadian citizens. Right, the money kept flowing.
Okay.
And but I'm saying the citizens. I mean, as I wrote to one parliamentarian, I mean, if you provide the money and the guns and the suicide bombers with whatever to kill other people, you are as guilty of murder as the person who actually pulls the trigger, right? That is the way I look at it.
It was my understanding, though, that the terrorist designation and the shutting down of the World Tamil Movement did curb the funding.
Well, that is your understanding, but I would suggest that you check with the security services to find out whether that ever stopped, because the World Tamil Movement came in 2008 and up to the, and they were banned in 2000. I mean, they were proscribed in 2008. So between 2006 and 2008, the whole business still went on.
Oh, sorry, I was confused with another organization. Finally, I just want to address the concern that many in your community have that the Prime Minister's position is strictly, quote, competing for the votes of the Tamils who supported Tamil terrorism in the Toronto area with the Liberals and the NDP. You think that the Prime Minister's position and the government's position is strictly politically motivated?
I think so, and I'll tell you why. To begin with, let us deal with, because that letter is primarily referring to the Commonwealth Conference, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the fact of the matter is, the Commonwealth Conference, I don't have to tell you, it's a group of 53 countries who meet every 2 years. And the theme of this conference that has just ended, the theme of that conference was the growth with equity and sort of an inclusive development program. That was the theme of the conference, okay? That was the theme, and Mr. Harper, would have had a lot to contribute to that theme. If he wanted to raise this issue of the Tamils and so on to as a sop for his electorate in Canada, he could have raised it in a bilateral forum, because there were so many other forums within the Commonwealth where you could have discussed these things. But exactly the theme of the conference, and like you go to any meeting, you have an agenda, you have a mission statement, that kind of thing. So the theme being growth with equity, right? So Canada could have, been a major player if you were to contribute to that theme. Just as all the other heads of government and so on, they had their side shows, but they participated. in that. And knowing what the theme of the conference was, knowing the purpose of meeting every 2 years. Okay, it is not to bring up one-on-one issues with one country. It is to be a collective organization to deal with collective problems. And most of these countries are what they call developing countries. So, so people like Mr. Harper and Mr. Cameron and all these people, they can bring to the table something very constructive. And so to me, by not going and just making a noise about his electorate in Canada, and he lost an opportunity. And the reason I say that it is vote based in Canada is because the whole world knows what is going on. For instance, Mr. Kenny, who is the prime person who deals with the ethnic vote program in the Toronto area. Mr. Kenny was in Sri Lanka in January this year. He was there on the 5th of January. Okay? When he went, he made a statement. I saw the press reports on that. Mr. Kenny comes back from that meeting and he meets with only the Tamil group on the 26th of January and put it on his Twitter account that he reported back to the Tamils. Now, how does that come across when you say that you are reporting back? To me, it looked as if he had something to take to Sri Lanka and was reporting back on the success of Alien. Furthermore, at that same meeting, and I saw the video of his meeting, the theme was, Canada banned the LTT in 2006. And now we are looking for reciprocity from the government of Sri Lanka to our concerns. That doesn't wash, Take a look at it because this is on video and what I'm telling you is easily verifiable. Okay. Mm-hmm. Secondly, the same thing happens now. Mr. Harper met in 2011 during the elections. Mr. Harper met with the Conservative candidate that he had in the Toronto area, right? Mm-hmm. I won't mention names, but you can check it out. He met with them. He had what he called a roundtable discussion with them. And the media report from that discussion was that if Sri Lanka did not do A, B, C, D, he would not go to Sri Lanka. And that those Tamils at that meeting actually said, okay, we have Mr. Harper on our side. That is 2011, right? 2011 was when we had the Commonwealth Summit in Australia, okay? So Mr. Harper was at that summit. And then the push was on, Sri Lanka should not have this 2013. But again, the rest of the Commonwealth did not agree. In April this year, John Baird goes to England for the final push to take the summit away from Sri Lanka. If you listen to some of the interviews that you have had on this topic, you will notice, I noticed from the links you gave me, that the diaspora attitude from Canada was, at first we wanted to move to stop it. Then when that failed, then we came up with the boycott, which is so when I say that he is playing to their agenda, that is what I mean, because all these links meet up. Finally, I would like to say, so Mr. Harper did not go. He sent Mr. O'Brien. Mr. O'Brien goes, and as I pointed out, lays that wreath. And it's a funny place that he chooses to lay the wreath in all of that island that suffered so much violence throughout 30 years. He chooses one spot where in the year 2000, in one battle, the LTT killed over 1,000 Sri Lankan soldiers in the effort to cut off the Jaffna Peninsula from the mainland. And he lays a wreath there, and as I pointed out, I won't go into again, with 3 different messages. On the 30th of November, Mr. O'Brien once again meets with the Tamil media in Toronto. Now, why is he not meeting with all the constituents? Mr. Harper is the Prime Minister of all Canadians. right? He is the Prime Minister of all Canadians, not just one little segment in the Toronto area. Mr. Harper, would all Canadians, I'm sure they do not even know what is happening in Sri Lanka. They do not. Mr. Harper should represent all Canadians,
Right, but
not
I mean,
not just one little segment.
the thing is, though, in any sort of situation, if the Prime Minister went to, say, Poland, it would probably be the Polish community that was most interested. So it might be
Yeah,
natural.
but you see, this is what I'm saying. This is what I call gesture politics. You know what I mean? Gesture politics.
No, but
And you cannot just base policy on. You have to base policy for all Canadians, not
no,
just for one segment.
I understand that. It's just in terms of, if the Prime Minister invited everybody to come talk about Poland, probably most of the people that would show up would be from the Polish community. So isn't it natural for the Prime Minister and the cabinet?
Well, Mr. Well, okay, it would have been all Polish. Well, there were no other communities that are present from Sri Lanka at these meetings.
Right.
Why is that?
Well,
why does Mr. Kenny only meet with the Tamils? When other people wanted to go to that meeting, he said no.
My understanding.
Why is it Mr. Oberoi is also going back only to the Tamil community? I mean, there's a problem there, isn't it? There are other Canadians in the Toronto area.
Right. My understanding, though, is that most Sinhalese in Canada are not particularly invested in the Sri Lanka issue. They're living their lives, and the Tamil community is much
Absolutely.
interested.
And that's the point that I was coming to. If people have come here to Canada and become Canadian citizens, then the political landscape here should be, our representatives should be working for their constituents here in Canada, not taking on, external things, unless, of course, it is impacting on Canada. And what is the impact that Sri Lanka is having on Canada? Nothing.
If it is of interest, though,
interest to a very small segment. Interest to a very small segment. And even in the Sri Lankan community, there is only one segment of the Tamil population who supported the LTT, who are the most vocal and who have their agendas. There are lots of others from the Tamils, from the Muslims, from all the Sinhalese, from all the communities in Sri Lanka who have come here, who have said, look, we are going to live here, we are going to be productive citizens, we are going to support this country, right? Let us get on with our lives. And why is it that all this attention from the media, from the politicians, from everybody, is geared to this one little vocal, vociferous segment? They are violating the rights of everybody else.
Well, would you agree, though, that while the amount of people that supported in the Tamil community the LTT is not the majority, that even many Tamils who didn't support the LTT think there are some very serious problems in Sri Lanka with respect to how the Tamil minority has been treated over the past 50 years? So, I mean, aren't they even interested?
That's again what I'm saying. Now they have come here. They are living here, right?
Right.
They have concerns for Sri Lanka, like most Sri Lankans who have come here, and most people who have come from anywhere in the world. They have relatives, friends, whatever, from where they have come. Why is it that this same community that was able to send so much money for bombs, for guns, for everything else, why do they not now come together? Now that those people who were under the LTT, and by the way, under the LTT, it was like a fascist regime. They could not move. They were a captive population. They did not have any of the rights that they have today. Today they can move anywhere, they can vote, they can do whatever. Now that opportunity is being given to these very same people, and I'm talking about the people who found all this money, during the war, why don't they help their families, their friends, their relatives? They don't have to go through the government. They don't have to do anything. They can, help them financially or in whatever way they can to uplift themselves, to get on with their lives. And the thing that has to be pointed out to is these people are here, right? They have a life here. They
Right.
should take into consideration what the people in Sri Lanka want, what the Tamils, if it is a Tamil, what the Tamils in Sri Lanka want. And they have to help those people to uplift themselves, to meet their aspirations, not the aspirations of the people, the diaspora who is living in another country.
Do you think most of the Tamils in Sri Lanka are happy to be in a united Sri Lanka?
Well, I don't know. You have to ask them. But what I'm saying is, as a one-on-one, they are there. If they are there, then they, like any other normal person, I mean, they have their own life, they have their goals, they have their aspirations. And these people should find out what those aspirations are and help them. If they want to get out, we'll help them to get out. If they want to live there, help them to improve their lives. They had the money to fund the terrorism, but so why don't they use that money now to help these people? That is the question I have.
What if the aspirations of the Tamils in Sri Lanka turns out to be a separate Tamil homeland? What should we all do then?
Well, that is for the people of Sri Lanka, the Tamils of Sri Lanka to decide. Let them come out and say, we want to separate. But what has happened is, even the chief minister of the northern province has said, no, we do not want a separate state. And by the way, I also in some of the videos you said, there is a misconception. We have always had Tamil MPs from those areas in parliament. There are two levels of government there. They have always been represented in parliament.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? In parliamentary elections, they have always had representatives. And so they have always had that. Now, that the TNA, for instance, you know, now they elected Justice Vigneswaran, he's the chief minister. Now, they are MPs in parliament. Even 2 days ago, they said, no, we do not want a separate state. So if the Tamils the Tamil representatives in Sri Lanka say that, Mr. Vigneswaran has said it, then why is it that the diaspora is pushing? So they have to, get me back to the point that they have to work with the Tamils of Sri Lanka. You know, they have to work with them. They have to support them. They have to find out what they want. Because to ask for a separate state is going backwards, not forwards.
Right. Do you think that the Tamil representatives in Parliament in Sri Lanka feel as free to speak and say what they want as, say, the NDP does here, or?
Yeah, of course they do. You look at what they are saying in Parliament. It's in the Hansard, similarly to what you have in Canada. I mean, it's reported in the newspapers. They are saying whatever they want. And these are MPs who have been there for a long time. And by the way, these same MPs, when in the heyday of the LTT, they couldn't live in those areas. They were living in Colombo. Even Justice Vigneswaran, who is now the chief minister, he has lived in Colombo all his life, right? Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter is, if you're talking about freedom and democracy and all these things, you have to take into consideration the people who are living there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to have some way of connecting with them and finding out what do they want, not what you want, but what they want.
In the course of my conversations with people, I've just gotten the sense that while the Tamil diaspora might not be completely in tune with what Tamils on the ground want, there's also a sense that a lot of Tamils on the ground are too afraid to say what they really think.
That is again a myth that they are spreading, because I mean, as I said, you know, the MPs, the political leaders, the Tamil leaders have always said whatever they wanted to say. They are the people who the Tamils have elected in Sri Lanka, right? They speak for them,
mm-hmm.
right?
And yeah, just in conversations I've had with people that have actually spoken to Tamils, I've gotten the sense. In one of my interviews, somebody said that there's a sense.
No, that's again the diaspora putting a spin on it. I mean, you know, that's what they've been doing for the last 30 years. So what is past is past. The way you move forward is to look at the future, and the future is to work with the people of Sri Lanka, to help them. That area that LTT controlled was totally devastated because the people were just herded around, you know, and they had to do whatever the dictates of the LTT were. Today they do not have that. These people here can help them. They should make an attempt to find out what it is that they want, whether they want to, you know, where do they want to live, if they need support, help them, and find out from them, okay, what is it you want to do? If you want to come to Canada, well, or Australia or whatever, well, that's a different story. But try to, if there are people who are living there and want to live there, then they should be helped to live there without, you know, and not a question of either or. No, you have to work within the framework. You have to work within the framework that is available.
Right. Last question, just in terms of the political motivations of the Canadian government, it's this same Harper government that designated the LTT a terrorist organization, and I know that there's people within the Tamil community that are still quite angry about that. So is this a government that's completely playing politics with the Sri Lanka issue, or
Absolutely, as I pointed out to you.
No, I know, but if they my point, just so I explain myself better to you, if they banned the LTTE, that would not be politically advantageous to them with the Tamil community. If they were just interested in pleasing the Tamil community, they never would have banned the LTTE.
Well, that was in 2006, but that's what I pointed out to you. It was banned on paper. Right, but what happened after that? They still function. Now, case in point, since you brought out Britain, let me point out to you what is happening in Britain. And no, let's stay with Canada. Subsequent to 2009, right, the Tamils who lived overseas, the diaspora, they set up what is called a transnational government in exile. And the goals of that government, and they have members, by the way, in Toronto too, because they have send out emails that they are having elections and so on. The goals of that government are still separatist. They want a separate state, nothing else. So these people are still functioning here. And the final point I want to make is, in 2009, it was the military leadership that was killed. The political leadership, the diaspora leadership, which were in part all a part of the same organization. They are alive and well in Canada, in Australia, everywhere else. They have their own groups, and I suggest that you ask them for their manifestos and see that. They are based in Canada. I have seen the emails where they have their elections and whatnot. Their mandate is still a separate state. And as long as that mandate is what they have, right, there is no moving forward. That is what I say. They should look at what they are doing. They should consult the people, the Tamil people of Sri Lanka, because certainly these people are not going back to Sri Lanka. They are the people who have to live in this so-called separate state. But the political leadership, the propaganda wing of the LTT is alive and well and functioning. It was just the military leadership that everything else remains the same.
Well, listen, you've been very generous with your time. I really appreciate you taking the time and arguing so forcefully your viewpoint on this. Ira de Silva, past president of the Sri Lanka United National Association of Canada, thanks again for sharing this time with me.
Thank you. Thank you.